The evening arrived softly over the town, like a tired mother lowering a blanket over restless children. Dust drifted through the air in pale gold ribbons, catching the last light of the sinking sun. Wooden storefronts stood shoulder to shoulder, their paint peeling like
The
old
price is too
memories.
high.
A
It's a
lone
fair
horse
price for the
shifted
risk.
near the
Risk,
hitching
we need a
post,
better deal.
Take it
reins
or leave it.
swaying in the warm wind. The bell above the general store door rang once. It was not a loud sound, but in a town that fed on silence, it was enough. She stepped inside with the quiet resolve of someone who had already survived worse than stares. Her name was Eliza Whitmore. Her boots were scuffed from honest work. The hem of her dress bore the faint dust of long roads and longer days. She wore no jewelry except a thin silver locket that had belonged to her father. It rested just below her collarbone, steady as her breathing. The store smelled of flour, leather, and old tobacco. Light filtered in through narrow windows, turning floating dust into something almost sacred. Conversations paused, not because she was loud, because she was alone. Behind the counter stood Mr. Carter, thin as a fence post, spectacles sliding low on his nose. He had known her father once, had shaken his hand many times, had praised his cattle, but men often remember the dead more fondly than they respect the living. She removed her gloves slowly, placing them on the counter as though handling fragile porcelain. "I need ammunition," she said. Her voice did not tremble. It carried no challenge, only fact. Somewhere near the barrels of grain, a man named Doyle let out a short laugh through his teeth. He leaned back in his chair, boots propped against a crate, hat tilted carelessly. "Ammunition," he echoed. "For what, Miss Whitmore?" "Hunting butterflies." A few men chuckled, not cruelly, just comfortably. Mr. Carter cleared his throat. His eyes did not meet hers. "That's not something I can sell you, Eliza. Not without proper arrangement." Proper arrangement. The words lingered in the air like smoke. She waited, gave him time to correct himself. He did not. "You ought to bring a husband," he added gently, as though offering advice instead of dismissal. "Or at least a man from town to make the purchase." Her father's land sat 5 miles east of town. Winter had taken him in a single quiet breath. Since then she had mended fences alone, fed cattle alone, buried 2 calves with her own hands when the cold proved too sharp. Coyotes had begun circling the property at dusk. And lately, something else had been circling too. Something that walked upright. She did not explain any of this. She simply looked at the shelf behind him, where small cardboard boxes rested like silent witnesses. "I can pay," she said. "That's not the matter." But it was... The rejection did not strike her like lightning. It settled slower than that, like frost creeping across glass. She nodded once. A gesture so small, almost vanished in the dim light. "Very well." She gathered her gloves, turned, walked toward the door. The bell rang again as she stepped outside. Inside, laughter resumed. Boots scraped against wood. Someone muttered something about knowing one's place. But in the far corner of the store, near a small iron stove where embers glowed faintly, a man had been sitting in silence. Thomas Hale. His hat was pulled low, shadowing steady eyes. He had come to town that afternoon with a modest herd, sold without spectacle, paid in exact coin, spoken little. He had watched Eliza stand at that counter, watched her spine remain straight, watched dignity refuse to bend. He did not rise when Doyle laughed, did not interrupt Mr. Carter. But after the bell's second chime faded and the dust settled back into stillness, he stood. His chair legs scraped gently across the floor. Mr. Carter looked up. Thomas approached the counter without hurry. "A box of .44 cartridges," he said. Mr. Carter hesitated only a second before retrieving it. Thomas laid coins down carefully. Exact payment. No more, no less. He took the small wrapped box in his hand, felt its weight. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, bleeding amber into violet. Through the front window, he could see her silhouette near the hitching post, one hand resting against her horse's neck, head slightly bowed, not in defeat, in thought. Thomas adjusted his hat, turned toward the door, and stepped into the fading light. The bell rang once more, and the evening held its breath. Outside, The sky had begun its slow surrender to evening. Amber faded into rose, rose into violet, and the first shy star blinked awake above the grain mill at the edge of town. Eliza stood beside her mare, one palm resting against the animal's warm neck. The horse breathed steadily, unaware of the weight that sometimes pressed against human ribs. She was not crying. Tears had visited her often that first winter after her father's passing. They had come like sudden rainstorms and left just as quietly. But tonight there were none. Only the familiar tightening in her chest that came when the world reminded her it preferred her smaller. She inhaled once. Slowly, footsteps sounded behind her. Not hurried, not heavy, just present. She did not turn at first. The footsteps stopped an arm's length away. "You dropped this." The voice was low, steady as river water moving over stone. She turned then. Thomas Hale stood before her, hat shadowing his eyes, one hand extended. In it rested the small paper-wrapped box. For a moment the world narrowed to that simple offering. She looked at the box, then at his face. There was no smirk there, no performance, no audience to impress. The men inside the store had already returned to their noise. The town watched from windows, yes, but Thomas did not look at them. Only at her. "I didn't drop anything," she said softly. A corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Reckon I did then. Seems it belongs to you." The wind shifted between them, lifting a loose strand of her hair across her cheek. She did not brush it away. Pride flickered first, a brief, stubborn flame. Then something gentler replaced it. Understanding. He was not rescuing her. He was restoring balance. Her fingers reached forward, brushing the paper. His knuckles were rough, skin marked by rope burns and sun. When their hands touched, it was not the kind of contact that sends sparks racing. It was quieter than that. It felt like recognition. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, as though she had accepted nothing more significant than borrowed sugar. "Town can be slow to change," he murmured, "but it does eventually." Across the street, Mrs. Alvarez paused in her doorway, a measuring tape draped around her neck. She watched with eyes that had seen enough seasons to know the difference between spectacle and sincerity. Near the stables, young Caleb pretended to sweep, though his gaze drifted toward them with open curiosity. On the porch, Doyle leaned against a post, chewing something bitter between his teeth. Thomas did not acknowledge any of them. "You manage that land east of Miller's Creek, don't you?" he asked. "I do. Alone. For now." He did not ask why she needed ammunition. Did not ask what danger pressed against her fences. In that absence of interrogation lay something rare. Trust. Most men in town had grown comfortable deciding what she could or could not handle. They offered advice wrapped in doubt, help laced with condescension. Thomas offered nothing except respect. "Coyote's been restless this season," he said instead. "I've heard them nights clear as church bells." She studied him then, searching for mockery. There was none. "Yes," she answered. "They have." A pause settled between them. Not awkward, just honest. "If you ever need spare wire for fencing," he added, "I've got extra in my wagon. Storm's been tearing through easy lately." She nodded, absorbing the offer without obligation. "I'm in what breaks," she said. "I can see that." The words were simple, but something inside her shifted. Since her father's death, she had grown accustomed to being observed as though she were an experiment bound to fail. People watched her land the way they watch a candle in strong wind, waiting for the moment it extinguishes. Thomas looked at her like a lantern already lit. He tipped his hat slightly. "I won't keep you from supper." She almost smiled. "And I won't keep you from yours." He stepped back then, boots stirring soft clouds of dust. He did not linger, did not attempt to stretch the moment beyond its natural breath. As he walked toward his horse, the last edge of sunlight caught the brim of his hat, casting his face briefly into gold before shadow reclaimed it. Eliza held the box of ammunition against her palm. It was not heavy, yet it felt like something more than cartridges. It felt like being acknowledged. Doyle spat into the dirt near the porch, but said nothing. Perhaps even he sensed that whatever had passed between them was beyond his reach. Mrs. Alvarez gave Eliza the faintest nod across the street, as if to say, sometimes the world corrects itself in quiet ways. Thomas mounted his horse with practiced ease. Before turning away, he glanced back once. Not possessive, not expectant, simply ensuring she was steady. She met his gaze and gave a small nod. "I am," it said. He rode off toward the western trail, silhouette folding into deepening blue. Eliza secured the ammunition in her saddlebag. The weight felt right there, tucked against leather and resolve. When she mounted her mare and turned eastward, the town behind her seemed smaller somehow, its narrow judgments less powerful against the widening sky. The first stars spread across the heavens like scattered promises, and as she rode toward her lonely stretch of land, she realized something had shifted inside her chest. Not love, not yet. Something quieter. The knowledge that strength does not always have to stand alone. The horizon opened before her, vast and waiting. And for the first time in many months, hope rode beside her. Weeks had passed since the sun had dipped low on that dusty street, painting the town in shades of gold and violet. The prairie seemed to stretch farther now, broader, freer, as if the horizon itself had grown patient. Eliza Whitmore's days had remained quiet, but not empty. The cattle grazed, fences creaked under the wind, and the coyotes still prowled, but something inside her had shifted, subtle as a whisper. One afternoon, she noticed a figure approaching along the narrow trail that led from town to her ranch. Not hurried, not intrusive, just present. Thomas Hale, his boots stirring small clouds of dust, carried a coil of wire slung across his shoulder. He greeted her with a nod. No grand flourish, no proclamations of heroism, just a man offering practical help. "I thought you might need this," he said simply. Eliza studied him. She did not smile. She rarely did these days when strangers approached. But there was trust in his quiet voice, in the way his eyes met hers without judgment. They worked side by side repairing the fence. She hammered the posts. He held the wire taut. Wind lifted strands of her hair across her face, and he let them fall where they may. Silence passed comfortably between them, filled only by the soft scrape of wood and the low murmur of cattle in the distance. The world had often treated her as fragile, as someone to be watched and measured. But here, beside him, there was no evaluation. Only presence, only respect. Later, as evening stretched across the prairie, they sat on a log, sharing water from a single canteen. The sun bled into the horizon, turning the sky into a wash of lavender and gold. Eliza spoke of her father, the weight of loss and the responsibility of solitude, her voice steady but fragile at the edges. He listened, never interrupting, never offering hollow comfort, only acknowledging the truth of her words with a nod, a glance, a quiet breath. Doyle had come through town again that week, boasting and making loud offers of help that rang empty in her ears. But Thomas never competed, never demanded attention. He simply stood beside her when she asked and walked away when she did not. One night, coyotes howled close to the fence line. Eliza's hands went to the rifle he had helped her acquire. The ammunition he had quietly purchased weeks before now rested firmly in her palm. Her fingers did not tremble. She loaded the rounds with careful precision, the weapon feeling steady, alive in her hands. Thomas stood beside her, not in front, not shielding but aligned, watching, respecting. The wind whispered across the prairie. The stars blinked awake. She turned to him, a faint flicker of gratitude in her gray-blue eyes. "It is not the bullets," she said softly. He tilted his hat, gazed gentle. "It is believing you deserve them." For the first time in months, she felt the weight of solitude lift just a little. Strength, she realized, did not always mean standing alone. Sometimes it meant allowing someone to see it beside you. And under the infinite western sky, trust bloomed quietly, like a flower bending toward light, slow and steady, unhurried by the judgments of the town. Dawn broke over the prairie in pale gold and rose, spilling light across the town like a soft blessing. The wooden buildings glowed warmly, dust rising lazily in the first morning breeze. It had been months since the day Eliza Whitmore walked out of the general store, denied something she had every right to possess. And yet, the town had not forgotten. A warning came that morning, shouts from the outskirts, horses thundering, the telltale dust clouds of bandits approaching the county line. The town meeting erupted in panic. Men banged fists on tables. Voices cracked and rose. Doyle, who had once mocked her, shouted that women should stay inside. They should hide. They should do nothing. But Eliza stepped forward, not defiantly, not recklessly, with quiet purpose. The rifle rested in her hands. The box of ammunition secured her side. Her eyes, gray-blue and steady, met each man in the room, not with anger, but with unshakable resolve. Thomas Hale stepped beside her, not as a protector, not as a savior, just as an equal, calm and measured, his presence steadying the room as much as the wind shifting over the prairie. Outside, the bandits neared. Dust swirled in their wake, their figures jagged against the horizon. Eliza raised a rifle. Her first shot rang clear, sharp, a warning and a message. The bandits faltered, startled by the precision and calmness of the woman they had surely underestimated. Another shot, deliberate and controlled, and they turned, retreating into the distance. The town watched. Silence fell heavier than any shout. Mr. Carter lowered his eyes, a quiet acknowledgement passing between him and her. The sheriff nodded subtly, the weight of respect settling over the room. Doyle said nothing. Words had nothing left to give. Later, outside the same general store where the bell had first announced her presence, Mr. Carter placed a box of ammunition on the counter. No speech, no apology, just acknowledgement. Eliza picked it up. She did not need anyone to buy it for her anymore. She had always carried the strength to claim it. Thomas stood beside her, not waiting for gratitude, not expecting affection, simply watching, steady and quiet, a companion in the long, open road of life. As the sun climbed higher, spilling light over the dusty street and the distant plains, Eliza realized something profound. Dignity was not given by others. It was earned, lived, and defended. And sometimes, the world learns not from shouts or threats, but from the calm certainty of a woman who knew her worth. For her, and for the town that had once doubted, the day belonged to courage, quiet strength, and the truth that respect cannot be demanded. It can only be recognized. And somewhere on the horizon, the wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying the memory of what had been denied and the triumph of what had been earned. Sometimes the world refuses you, not because you are incapable, but because it has not yet learned your strength. Eliza's story is not about rescue. It is about being seen, being believed in, and standing with quiet courage when everyone else doubts. Strength is not always loud. Respect is not always earned with shouts. And sometimes one small act of kindness, like a cowboy handing her ammunition, can change everything. If this story touched something quiet inside you, if you've ever been underestimated, or if someone once believed in you when no one else did, share your thoughts below. Tell me from where in the world you are watching. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories from the Wild West that feel like memories passed down through generations. Because every town has its stories, every soul deserves to be seen, and sometimes the quietest courage leaves the loudest mark.